respect the time of those who have joined us this evening, as well as our guest presenter. My name is Dr. Erica Buchanan Rivera. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion here within Washington Township. We also want to acknowledge that today is Veterans Day, and so we certainly want to think about our servicemen and those who have worked hard to fight for our country as we honor and uplift this day. We have held this parent caregiver webinar series to explore issues of educational equity throughout our district. It's important to understand that the concept of equity means that we are giving students what they need in order to thrive within our systems. And tonight we're going to focus on high ability learners. And so we do have Karen Brown, who is joining us again, who will be reintroduced by our new district high ability coach, Andrea Cannon. I wanted to make you aware that we have recently brought Andrea on board to oversee some of our high ability systems alongside of myself. She is going to work closely with our teachers, coaching them, helping them to work through new structures as pertain to high ability clusters. And so we're very excited to bring her on board as she has a plethora of knowledge and experience as a high ability teacher, and wanted to make sure that you were aware of who is supporting educators within our township as related to gifted education. So Andrea Cannon, going to let you speak more about yourself and then introduce our guest presenter.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here this evening. Over the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to enter the classrooms all across Washington Township and see the amazing work that our educators are doing, both in self-contained and cluster model classrooms. I've been so impressed by the level of talk and collaboration amongst students, and I've really been touched just by the sense of community that teachers have created as they work to diversify instruction and learning opportunities in an effort to create an equitable learning environment for all students. So we continue this work tonight with Karen Brown. Karen is the Director of Gifted and Accelerated Learning in Scottsdale Unified School District. She teaches in the Gifted Education Master's Program at Arizona State University, and she consults throughout the country. She was the recipient of the 2018 National Association for Gifted Education Specialists and Masters Award, the co-recipient of the 2013 NAGC Professional Network Award, and the 2013 AAGT Gifted Teacher of the Year. She's also co-authored 2 books, Differentiated Lessons for Every Learner and A Teacher's Guide to Flexible Grouping and Collaborative Learning, and the winner of the 2019 NAGC Book of the Year Award. Today, she is joining us from the NAGC National Conference, and we're so lucky that she has carved out time to be with us this evening. So I'll toss it to you. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you very much. So I want to welcome you this evening, and I am going to be sharing information about ways to support high ability learners, whether they're in school or at home, because we recognize that these students are high ability, whether they're in your home, whether they're asleep, whether they're awake, no matter where they are, they're high ability learners. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So that we can get started. And if you have questions as we are working, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. All right. All right, you should be seeing my screen right now, hopefully. And we can get started. We're talking about high ability 24/7 this evening, thinking and learning. As we think of this, we have to remember that high ability is not how intelligent or how smart a child is. It's really in the process of how they think, how they accumulate information. High ability learners actually process information in different ways than a typical learner does. They will many times process information more quickly. They may have a better retrieval system. But one thing to remember is that high ability does not always mean high achievement. And high achievement does not necessarily mean high ability. Oftentimes I will have parents come to me and say, my child is excelling and I'm sure they're a high ability learner. And as we look at the learner and we do ability testing and we we come back with, no, they're a high achiever, and that's awesome. It's wonderful that they're a high achiever, but they're not a high ability student. High ability students actually need to be taught in different ways because of the way that they think, because of the way they process that information. And that's why the aspects of critical and creative thinking are so important for these learners. And that's really what we're going to talk about over the next 40 minutes or so. What is critical thinking, and what do we mean when we say creative thinking? And how, as a parent, do I foster that at home? What are some things that I can do outside of what's happening in my child's classroom? And hopefully to give you some things that you can begin to recognize that are happening in your child's classroom that perhaps you didn't realize the why behind what they were doing. So when we think about divergent thinking, this is something that we want to foster in learners. It's that ability to keep an open mind, to not judge or critique, but to take in the ideas and give them the opportunity to be expanded upon. It's the process of coming up with many ideas. It's that fluency piece of generating idea after idea after idea, rather than getting stuck on one thing. It's the ability to be accepting of the ideas of others. And this can be a challenge for high ability kids. They like to be right, and they want their answer or their thought to be the right thought. So the process of divergent thinking supports them in helping them understand that we want to expand our thinking. We want to pull in as many ideas as we can, and then many times pull those ideas together to grow that. It's that ability of using your senses and your brain to gather information. Oftentimes I tell kids when they're struggling with divergent thinking, sleep on it. Sleep on it. Give yourself some time for your brain to start germinating some more of those ideas. Divergent thinking requires kids to step out of their comfort zone. It requires all of us to take those risks, to maybe stretch ourselves a little bit and to look at something from a perspective that perhaps we've never thought of before. And then one of the fun parts of divergent thinking is that ability to hitchhike on the ideas of someone else. I saw this person's idea and I would like to add on to that. So it's also that process of being able to listen and really hear what other people are thinking. So divergent thinking is something we have to practice. For some of us, it comes really easily. For others, it doesn't come easily, and they really have to struggle with that idea of fluency, that idea of being open-minded and accepting of all the different ideas. So if it's not divergent thinking, then it is more of a convergent thinking process. Both of these are critical. We need to be divergent thinkers. We also need to be convergent thinkers and able to understand the goal behind each of these and how they impact the learning process. So in a convergent thinking model, what I'm going to do is work to clarify the problem. I'm going to work to figure out what is it that we need. Well, once I figure that out, I may need to put my divergent cap on to start coming up with possible solutions, to start coming up with different ways. But I've got to be able to examine the problem first so I know what it is I'm looking for. I use my convergent thinking cap when I'm evaluating a solution. Will this work or not? Some things that I may have come up with in my divergent process, I'm going to have to eliminate because as I look at them, I realize, ooh, wait, that's not going to work. Somebody might piggyback on one of my ideas, though, and add something in, thus making it work. So these two thinking models work really tightly together. In a convergent thinking process, I'm going to look at all the options. So I'm going to look at all of those things that my divergent thinking process came up with and start to process through them. Again, I want to be reflective in my convergent thinking. I'm looking at that. Is this working? Does this make sense? Am I moving forward with this? And again, I tell learners, if you're stuck, sleep on it. Give your brain time to process. One of the things about convergent thinking is we have to focus on the positive aspects. And I want to teach learners to, I refer to them as don't be a negative Nelly. I don't want you to just look at the ways, well, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. I want you to look at What are the components that do work? What are the strengths of all of these ideas? Because as I begin to look at those strengths in my convergent thinking, now I'm going to put that divergent cap back on and start spreading out again and figuring out, okay, if these are the strengths and I know them, then what can I add on to them to make this work for me? So 2 types of thinking that our learners have to have, that we have to move forward in making decisions, but they both serve different purposes. They are equally important. Typically, one is easier for a learner than the other, but we need to practice them. So when we think about our students, the characteristics for students fall along these lines. So I want my student to have that openness, to have that active imagination, to be curious, to enjoy variety. These are the qualities that I see in high ability kids. They come up with sometimes wild ideas, and we have to step back sometimes and not squelch those, but ask them to give me more. Tell me more about this. Remember that many of our greatest inventions were once thought of as wild ideas. So don't squelch that craziness. Remember that there may be a really great idea in that process. The ability to look inwardly and outwardly is another piece of this, that spontaneity and learning to trust their instincts, that flexibility, the ability to see things in new ways and be willing to stretch yourself. Are you adaptable? Can you transfer information into new settings? Are you a risk taker? Are you willing to try? Oftentimes, high ability students get labeled as, oh my gosh, they're risk takers. Really? Have you met them? High ability kids like to be right. So oftentimes that gets in the way of my willingness to take a risk, because what if I'm wrong? We've got to overcome that hurdle, because I'm not going to be a true thinker if I'm not willing to take those risks, if I'm not willing to take those chances. And when we have issues where a learner is hesitant, they're perhaps too perfectionistic in their views, and so they're not willing to take those chances, one of the biggest things we can do is work with growth mindset with them and help them understand that you're right. You don't know how to do this yet. And that's okay. It's important that they know that you as an adult also have things that you don't do well yet. And make a yet board in your home, allow your learner to have a yet board. Perhaps you have a yet board that shares, these are the things that I'm working on. And as I get better at something, as I have mastery of something, I can take it off my yet board, but I need to put something in its place, because we need to always be growing and stretching ourselves. Being willing to accept the ambiguity of solution, that's difficult. That says that I'm willing to work in the gray area. High ability kids oftentimes struggle with that. They want an answer. Is it right or is it wrong? Mrs. Brown, what's the answer? Well, there are a lot of answers to this problem. But what's the answer? There are a lot of answers. It all depends on how you look at it. Okay, but Mrs. Brown, what's the answer you're looking for? When what they're seeking is they want to take the ambiguity out of it. And our goal is to not let them do that, but to get them comfortable with that ambiguity. Building complexity into their thinking. Complexity ignites the brain, and that's what I want to do. I want to ignite them. I want to get them excited. One of the things that we know is that when we provide a learner with something that is complex, that brain lights up. When we provide them with something that's just difficult, we actually quiet the brain. So my goal is to level up that complexity, to add those layers of complexity onto a task, not just make it harder, but make it more complex, because we thrive as human beings on complexity, and high ability kids really need complexity to stay excited and engaged. And then there's that disorder combination, that willingness to understand and respect the fact that some things are unpredictable. Well, how can I know? You can't. Some things in our lives are just unpredictable, and that disorder is part of the process. That can be unsettling for learners. The pandemic has really given our kids a lot of unsettling things to deal with, and helping them stay excited and motivated and persevering forward is a challenge at times. So if I want my learner to be a thinking learner, then I have to think about the environment that they are growing in, the classroom environment, but also the home environment. And so I want you to think for just a minute about some of these things that are environmental characteristics that foster that thinking mind. So intellectual independence, the ability to be allowed to think beyond, things that recognize and nurture my brain's development, encouraging that intellectual risk-taking, asking questions like, what do you think? What would you do in this situation? Eliminating the stereotyping and the bias, eliminating the bullying, an environment that is open to ideas and open to a variety of viewpoints is an environment that fosters thinking. Delay the gratification. Yeah, kids today, people today, we're an instant gratification society right now. We get instant gratification on our phone, on our computers, we got to learn to move away from that, because thinking says, I have to process, I have to synthesize information. I have to give my mind and my thoughts and my emotions time to merge together. It's not going to happen at the snap of a finger. And oftentimes that first response may not be the best one. I need to generate multiple responses and see what I can come up with. A thinking environment nurtures those social relationships. It's built on trust. I have to believe that this is a safe place for me to share my ideas, whether that's in a classroom or whether that's at home. And that goes back to working with siblings. I have actually 5 children. I have 4 boys and 1 girl. And many times the conversation that I had with my own children was, you're not listening to what your brother or sister is saying. I need you to be more of a listener. You're making a judgment. We got to have that safe learning environment, that we know that our ideas aren't going to just be shot down instantly. Because what happens when my ideas get shot down repeatedly, I stop sharing them. And I don't ever want a learner to do that. Providing that supportive environment for all learners, all ideas matter, giving them that sense of control when it's appropriate, and building that learner's responsibility. As I have to take ownership. I take ownership of what I'm doing to move forward. And that's an important piece. And then it needs to be fun and enjoyable. So there are 7 different critical thinking strategies that I'm going to address real quickly. And the reason for that is these are ones that you can do at home. Analogies are so easy to do at home in just general conversation with your students, whether they are concrete to abstract or whether they're abstract to concrete. They're just a means of getting my brain to think about something differently. How is a turtle like an education? How's a rug like an insight? Just getting kids to think and to talk. And sometimes it requires then that we start looking at it from well, what do you mean by an insight? What do you mean by a democracy? And so we have to start building that definition, building that vocabulary word bank. How's a conversation like a strawberry? Is going the opposite direction. How is conflict like a clock? When we allow kids to use analogies, we build that cognitive process of transforming information from one context to another. That process is huge when we think about creating thinkers, that ability to manipulate information. So what about number 2? Well, point of view. Getting learners to look at things from a variety of perspectives, asking them to think about the factors that are involved after they've read something, or perhaps it's something that they've watched, and now we're going to have a conversation. Why do you think the author sees the way they see it? How are they portraying their point of view? It can be not only the author, but it can be characters within a story. I read a story with students called All About the Bears, and it's called Beware of the Bears. And it's a reverse on Goldilocks and the three bears. And in the story, the three bears are very upset with that Goldilocks has destroyed their home. And Papa Bear tells Baby Bear, you go find that Goldilocks and we're going to do the same thing to her house. And they go, and Baby Bear finds it, and they go and they do all of the different, they go through all the different rooms in the same way that Goldilocks went through the rooms. But at the end of the story, Goldilocks comes in and the bears are like, see what we did? And Goldilocks laughs at them. And she says, this isn't my house. And the bears are like, uh-oh. And all of a sudden, Baby Bear says, oh my, as he's looking out the window. And who's walking up to the house but the big bad wolf? And the question that I ask my learners is, who cleans up the house? Well, it depends on whose point of view you're thinking of. Because from the bear's point of view, they wouldn't have done it if Goldilocks hadn't done theirs. From Goldilocks's point of view, she didn't make a mess of the house. From the big bad wolf's point of view, he didn't ask for his house to be messed up. Sometimes it's simple things where I'm asking learners to look at it from a different perspective. Whose point of view are you looking at? Because in our world, we need to know the point of view that people are bringing to the table. It helps us gain insights. So number 3, complete and incomplete. So fill in the missing word. George Reed, Benjamin Rush, and John Adams were all what? Find the missing numbers in the sequence. Basically, what I'm asking the brain to do is activate prior knowledge and fill in to complete the process. This is an easy one with kids. As you're riding in the car, I will say to my kids, or used to say to my kids, they're all grown up now. Okay, we're going to play complete the incomplete. And I would give them one, and they would see if they could complete it. And I'd give them another one. And pretty soon one of them would go, I've got one. Okay, everybody ready? And they would give one. You want it to go both ways. You want them to try to give you an incomplete to finish, as well as you're giving them an incomplete to finish. So webbing and diagramming. There are 2 awesome sites that you can use, but you don't have to have a site to do webbing and diagramming. This is simply a way of kids seeing the relationships that exist in a situation, getting them to see that ripple effect of what's happening. The nice thing is it's also a way for them to unpack the thinking that they're doing on a particular topic. So you start with a concept and they start breaking that concept apart and pulling out the pieces and then making connections to those pieces, and they see how big of a diagram or how big of a web they can build. Hypothetical thinking. I will tell you right now, high ability kids love hypothetical thinking because it's the what if, and they will drive you crazy with this, but it's actually a good way for them to learn logical reasoning and abstract thinking. So what would it be like if you had a choice of whether or not to go to school? What if it was your choice as a learner? What if things fell up instead of down? What would happen if there was no rain at all during the summer? Now, I live in Arizona, and there are times where we feel like there is no rain at all during the summer. But what would happen if across our planet there was no rain during the summer? What would happen? What if? Reversals of thinking. This is where I'm asking a learner to reframe the information from another point of view. This really does a great job of getting that student who's stuck. They're in a rut. They can't seem to move forward. They're stuck. I want to reframe the way they're thinking. And so I'm going to ask them to look at the situation through a different lens. And in my classroom, I used to have just glasses that just had clear glass in them. And I would say to the kids, okay, we're going to reframe our thinking. Put your glasses on. And the kids would put their glasses on. I'd say, okay, we're going to look at it from a different view. I want you to look at it from the perspective of a parent. Why is it important to send your child to school? I want you to look at it from the perspective of someone who has just lost a political race. Suppose the loser of a race was actually the winner. So what I'm asking the student to do is reframe a situation so they can think about it differently. And the last one is that application of different symbol systems. This is one that boys especially like, as do our visual learners, because it allows them to step out of the confines of the current system and pull something else in. Draw a picture without words that could represent the Gettysburg Address. Use music to depict a character or perhaps a situation in a theme or novel. Act out the math problem. What does it look like? How do you act out a subtraction problem or an addition problem or an algebra problem? This is one that pushes kids out of their comfort zones, but it's one that really gets them thinking, because if I can draw a picture that represents the Gettysburg Address without any words, do I really understand this concept? Yeah, I do. I do. Because I'm accessing different portions of my brain to be able to employ the different symbol systems. So those are the 7 critical questioning strategies that really promote the thinking process. And I would really encourage you to think about 1 or 2 of them. I encourage parents to put them on an index card and toss them in the car, so that when you get in the car, you can pull that index card and go, oh, I'm going to use complete and incomplete as we're driving to school. Or put them on the counter when you are cooking or getting something ready, and ask your kids those concepts. So now let's make a shift. All right, let's talk about creativity. So creativity is the act of producing something original and useful. It is an essential skill. And in fact, when the Fortune 500 companies got together and said, what is the one competency that is needed for leadership? Creativity is what came out, because creativity says, I am going to be able to see beyond what is currently in front of me. That's essential. So how do I support my learners in doing that? Well, creative thinking requires us to take time to think things through. We have to have considered multiple options. It asks us sometimes to look at our ideas from a distance and to ponder what's next. What's the next step that would happen? What's going to go beyond what I currently see? So there are some elements of critical thinking that you're going to see related to divergent and convergent thinking. So in critical thinking, we call it fluency of thought. When I am thinking creatively, I want to generate as many ideas as I can. I am not worried about whether the idea works or not. No. All I'm trying to do right now is generate ideas. I did an activity with a group of students, and I brought a brick into my classroom. And I sat the brick down and I said, I want you to take out a piece of paper and pencil, and I want you to generate as many uses for that brick as you can. Well, I had a couple kids that maybe got 5 or 6, and they're like, well, I can't think of any more. I said, you can't think of anything else you could do with a brick? And they started thinking. And then I said, okay, get with a partner. Start thinking, and suddenly the ideas started flowing. Well, you could do this. Well, you could do this. Well, you could do this. Mrs. Brown, does it have to, can I add things to it? I said, I didn't say you couldn't. What are all the possible things you could do with a brick? The idea is to get kids to move beyond that idea that there's one answer. No, there's many answers to this question. Fluency of thought is a very non-judgmental, it's a very neutral response. So when you're asking learners to generate the millions of things, the goal is when they say something to not respond with, oh, that's a great idea. That's an idea. That's an idea. I want to keep my response neutral because I want them to keep going. I don't want to judge what they've said. And I don't want to say, oh my gosh, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. No. My goal is to get as many ideas as they can come up with. Then I'm going to move to that flexibility. When we talk about developing flexibility in a learner, it's that ability to adapt. that ability to adapt to new situations, the willingness to try a different approach. High ability learners oftentimes get stuck. What they've tried isn't working. And I will oftentimes have students come up to me and, Mrs. Brown, I've tried 5 different things and none of it's working. Okay, so what have you learned? Well, I haven't learned anything. I just told you I've tried 5 different things and none of it's working. I said, no, you have learned. What did you learn from the first thing you tried? Well, I learned that it didn't work. Okay, let's go back. What else did you learn that led you to the second thing you tried, that then led you to the third thing you tried? Because every time we do something, we learn something. It's just a matter of being willing to really look at those approaches and evaluate them for what they teach us. It means not accepting the first most obvious answer. But isn't that easy? Yeah, but that first answer may not be the best answer. It means being able to say, well, what else? What other thing could I do? How else could I adapt this? Getting our kids to think flexibly can be challenging for high ability learners because they do tend to get locked on to that. There's one way to do this. We see this a lot in math where they get locked onto an algorithm. And it's like, what if you didn't have the algorithm? Well, but I do have the algorithm. Yes, but what if you didn't? What if you were in a situation and you needed to solve this problem and you didn't know the algorithm? Could you still solve it? I don't know. So let's find out. Let's find out if you could. Let's try as many different ways to solve this as we can. That originality piece. Constantly being willing to change one's perspective to see it from an original lens. Being open to original ideas. Being willing to look at the unique, the unusual, and the novel. Just because it hasn't been done, just because we haven't seen that before, doesn't mean it's not a good idea. If you look at things that are very commonplace today, at one point, those were somebody's nutty ideas. Those were the ideas that people said, that will never work. The mere fact that I'm doing a presentation from a hotel in Denver to families across the country, years ago, that would have been, that can't happen. That's not possible. You can't do that. At one point, electricity was a nutty idea. We have things, we have kids that ride around on scooters, motorized bicycles, all kinds of things that we have cars running on electricity. We have cars that are running with no drivers. Those were somebody's unique, unusual, and novel idea. And they were willing to step out there and being willing to see the potential of something. And then we have elaboration. Inspired elaboration is what I love to call it, because it's that willingness to expand on an idea, to embellish an idea, to extend an idea, to refine an idea, and to stretch an idea. I equate it to the cook in the kitchen who's got a recipe that they're tweaking, and they keep trying this and this and this. Elaboration is where we see really ideas blossom, because I'm going to take something and I'm going to extend it. I'm going to expand it, to move beyond and see what I can come up with. So, creativity does not happen in a vacuum. It requires the multiple voices and views of others. Dr. Cash said that, and the first time he said it, I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Creativity doesn't happen all by myself. Creativity is the ability to pull from others and extend and expand. So one more thing before I open it up for questions. It's important to remember that all learners benefit when critical and creative thinking is embedded in a learning environment, whether that learning environment is happening in a classroom or whether it's happening at home. High ability kids benefit, absolutely. All kids benefit. All learners benefit. Because sometimes I have parents who say, well, I have a high ability child, and then I have a child who's not demonstrating high ability. Okay, we all benefit from critical thinking and creative thinking. We all benefit when learner diversity is valued. Value the diversity that we see around us. Our world would be so boring if we were all the same. Our world would be so boring if we all thought the same. And valuing that learner for who they are. Remembering that development is as important as academics. And sometimes we get focused on the academics and we forget that, especially with a high ability learner, I may have an asynchrony. So I may intellectually be functioning here, and that's the academic piece that you're seeing. Well, they're reading at this level. It's great. But remember that while I may be reading like an 11 or 12-year-old, I'm still 7. Value the fact that I'm 7. Because you see, I get to be 7 once. And once that's gone, I don't ever get to get it back. Take the time to recognize developmentally where your learner is and appreciate the developmental milestones that they're making. Oftentimes, I have parents that are only looking at the academic milestones that their children are making instead of the developmental ones. Developmental ones are the exciting ones. The academics will come and go. And then I would encourage everyone to remember that all children, all learners benefit when I, as a learner, am valued for who I am, when who I am is just as important as my ability. And without meaning to, sometimes as parents, we say things to kids like, oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're so bright. I can't believe you're able to do that. When we do that, we reinforce for that learner that that's who they are. They are the child who knows the answer. That's not who they are. That's an aspect of them, but it's not who they are. And unfortunately, that precipitates, that increases that perfectionism, that perfectionistic thought on the part of the child that if I don't know the answer, if I am not the best at, then I'm less than. I don't ever want a learner to feel that I'm less than, because no learner is less than. We all have an important place and an important role to play. The key for any learner, I don't care whether they are high ability, whether they are struggling, is growth. Because you see, growth is our goal. I want every learner to grow. And the way learners grow is by fostering that creative and critical thinking in all aspects of their life. So, thank you for your time. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I do want to open it up for any questions that anyone has. I'm going to stop sharing. Did we have any questions? I don't see any in the chat, but I'm just checking.
Karen, I really appreciated what you said at the end regarding perfectionism and just noting that every child's identity is important. And some of the best learning experiences are built upon what their unique experiences bring to the table. I appreciate you bringing that up because I think it's important to understand that the learning experiences of every child is going to be different depending on the environment that they come from, and that the learning environment that's being provided to them has been created based on the unique set of circumstances that might be different in every classroom.
I just had a conversation with a father who is putting his twins in school for the first time. And they are both going to be in one of our cluster classrooms. And his big worry is, he said, but I don't want them to be compared. I said, well, number one, you need to stop referring to them as the twins. They are 2 separate children. and they will embrace the world very differently. Their teachers are going to think of them as independent learners. They're not going to think of them as the twins. They're going to think of them as Abby and Amanda. And I need you to start thinking of them as Abby and Amanda. I said, because in our conversation, you've referred to them over and over again as the twins. Don't give them one identity. Let them each have their own identities and let them each grow and move forward. So I do see a question in the chat that says, how do we address perfectionism at home and the frustrations children may have when completing tasks at home? Yeah, perfectionism is in every aspect of a gifted or high ability child's life. It is something that they deal with every day. One of the things that I really, really encourage parents to do is to build that growth mindset. When you see that frustration coming, when you see them getting worked up, I oftentimes ask kids to step back. Step back can be as simple as if they're sitting at a table, pushing away from that table and dropping their hands to their sides. And then I tell them, okay, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to count backwards from 10 or from 20, depending on the age of the learner. And then open your eyes. And now let's think about what just happened. Because what perfectionism gets kids caught in a spiral. It gets them stuck and they're just spinning. I talked to the kids about the fact that it's a lot like that little wheel on your computer that spins and spins and spins. I said, what do you do when that happens? Oh, Mrs. Brown, you have to you have to reset the whole computer when that happens. I said, well, you know what? I need to reset your brain. I need to have your brain take a break. I said, and when you count backwards from 20, your brain has to disengage from what you're thinking about and has to move on to something else. Now, you were struggling with this and you don't understand it yet. This is difficult for you. You're not good at it yet. Take a breath. We all have things we're not good at yet. Allowing them to step away from a situation and then go back at it. Remembering that sometimes that perfectionism is because the task is more than I can handle right now. So maybe break the task into pieces for them, or maybe recognize that, ooh, I pushed too far. They weren't ready for this. And that's okay. That's okay to not be ready. Value their mistakes as much as you value their successes. I used to refer to what's your most important mistake this week? What's the best mistake you made this week? Oh, Ms. Brown, I know what it was. It was when I did this because I learned so much from it. I will say to students, I see 2 opportunities for brain growth. Are you willing to take them? Because that puts it right back in my learners' hands. And I want to put it back in their hands. So at home, when I see a child that's struggling, I see an opportunity to grow your brain. Do you want me to support you with that? Or do you want to just step away for a little while? There's nothing wrong with stepping away from a situation that I'm getting frustrated in. How do we balance the importance of academic performance and creative endeavors? Well, I think we need to remember that they have equal value. And oftentimes we weight the academic more than we weight the creative. And we do a disservice to our learners when we do that, because so much is gained through those creative endeavors, whether that's through music, whether that's through art, whether that's through theater, whether we have all kinds of creative endeavors that really grow us as individuals and expand our knowledge base. When we don't give that as much emphasis as we do the academic, what we tell the learner is, this is less important to me as your parent. Your academic performance is more important to me. It's not. So helping learners find that balance between both, but it's a value on the part. Our children take their value from us. What do we value? If we value the artwork that they just did, if we value the song that they just wrote, if we value the athletic activity that they just participated in and excelled at, if we put value on that, they put value on it. But if we don't, and if we always refocus them back on the academics, then they're going to say, no, it's not as important. Does clustering add more frustrations if students are not working with students at their level? Actually, it doesn't. It actually minimizes the frustrations, because what I'm able to see is that everybody has a level that they're able to work at. So as a learner, I need to understand that what comes easy to me may not come easy to you, but there will be things that I'm struggling with that you may excel at. And being able to see the varied learning levels within a classroom is actually beneficial to a high ability learner, because when they're always with other high ability kids, they don't get to see that all the time. They need to see how other students, the best life lesson that I had a high ability child have, and that he shared with me, was we had 2 learning disabled students in the cluster classroom. They were great kids, but they both struggled in mathematics. They're good readers, but math was where their specific learning disability was. And this young man said to me later, he said, I always assumed that math came easy to everyone because it comes so easy to me. And he said, and as I watched them try to work their way through something, he said, I suddenly realized, you know what? They have better problem solving skills than I do. I said, really? What do you mean they have better problem solving skills than you do? He goes, I have no idea how to problem solve like they did. All of the ideas they came up with to work their way through that problem, I don't know that I could have done that. I said, so what does that tell you? I need to work on my problem solving, Mrs. Brown. I need to stop assuming that if I don't have an immediate answer, that I can just quit, I can just give up. He has perseverance that I don't have. And you keep talking in our class about you've got to learn to persevere. I think I know why you keep saying that. So
I would
actually,
also, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would also offer, in a beautifully constructed cluster classroom, there are opportunities for students who are at the same developmental level to work together and to push one another's thinking. That's
Absolutely
one beautiful construct of the model. But then also the mixed ability grouping has so many benefits too. You were talking about just the idea of academic empathy and understanding differences and how that can be of such a value. So from both ends, the cluster model really does meet the needs.
It's a real world learning environment. I mean, we have to remember that our students don't live in a high cap world. They don't live in a high ability world. They live in a world where there are lots of different people and lots of different learners. And while I need to have them with learners of like ability so that I can continue to challenge them, so that I can continue to push them, having that beautiful mix in that classroom is really beneficial to them. How do we battle elitism that may exist in high ability? Well, that elitism oftentimes exists because of us as adults. We created it. And so being willing to support our learners in understanding that high ability doesn't make you any better than anybody else. It just means your brain processes information differently. Well, a lot of people's brain processes information differently. Doesn't make you better than somebody else, just means you think a little bit differently. And because of that, you're going to need a little bit different instruction. But it doesn't make you better than anyone else. And so that's a constant conversation that we have to have with our learners. And as adults, we need to remember our children are listening constantly. If the first thing you say when someone asks about your children is that they're high ability, then you've told your learner that that's the most important part of them. Is it? Because I know that for my kids, I have 3 who are high ability. I have 1 who is profound, but that's not the most important thing about him. It's just another aspect of him. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening. Any other questions that you have?
We just appreciate you, Karen, coming back for the second part of this series and
Absolutely.
on so many important topics that parents have just about the social and emotional aspect of reaching their child at home and at school, understanding strategies that they can use to push creative and critical thinking. Hopefully, we've been able to add some more tools to the toolbox of our parents and
I hope so.
be watching this later too, because so many of those strategies are applicable in the high ability classroom, and they're strategies that are great for all kids.
All kids.
The beautiful thing about a cluster model too, I'm going to throw that out there, all kids benefit from having access to higher thinking strategies like the ones that you were able to promote this evening.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.